Welcome to our Tuesday night chat with the rabbis about Torah and more. Thank you all. We had a couple people pass away this weekend, Alex Trebek on Sunday and Rabbi Jonathan Sacks on Saturday. You might not know of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, but he was a very important gentleman in England. He is a lord as well as a rabbi, and I am going to show you one of his talks, a part of his talk. And first, we're going to see a little clip about Alex Trebek as well. So just hold still, and I'm going to mute everybody, and I'm going to show the two videos, okay?
Chances are, if Alex Trebek played Jeopardy himself, he may have well been a champion. What we know for sure is that as an understated and clever host, Trebek was in a league all of his own. He died today at his home in Los Angeles. Trebek was 80. Here is Nancy Chen.
This is Jeopardy!
For more than 3 decades as host of Jeopardy, Alex Trebek was a constant presence in millions of American homes.
Let's go to work right now.
Trebek announced in March last year he had been diagnosed with cancer.
Just like 50,000 other people in the United States each year, this week I was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer.
Trebek, born in Canada, got his media start as a part-time announcer for the CBC.
In what part of the world would you find a wombat? Alex Trebek.
He became host of Jeopardy in 1984. His quick wit and dry sense of humor made him a television icon.
What is sorry?
I usually precede it with ooh, sorry.
Of course, it's 27 minutes at Jeopardy.
The serious Trebek was famously portrayed and mimicked in popular culture.
I'll take the rapists for 200. That's therapists, not the rapists.
When you make fun of someone like me and a show such as Jeopardy, it means we've arrived.
Trebek hosted more than 8,000 episodes, from kids to celebrities to champions.
A Jeopardy champion with $1.
As he was receiving treatment for cancer, Trebek spoke with Jane Pauley on CBS Sunday Morning.
For 35 years, I've enjoyed the success of the show, but I've never really thought about the impact the program was having on American viewers. And I've become part of their lives.
Trebek taped new episodes during the pandemic and through his treatment, with fans and even show contestants wishing him well.
Did you come up with the right one? No? What is we love you out? That's very kind. Thank you.
In a show all about the questions, Trebek always had the answer. Nancy Chen, CBS News.
And now I'm going to show Rabbi Jonathan Sacks.
These are the times, said Thomas Paine, that try men's souls. And they're trying ours now. This is a fateful moment in the history of the West. We've seen divisive elections and divided societies. We've seen a growth of extremism in politics and religion, all of it fueled by anxiety, uncertainty, and fear of a world that's changing almost faster than we can bear, and the sure knowledge that it's going to change faster still. Because it's the people not like us that make us grow. And that is why I think we have to do just that. The trouble with Google filters, Facebook friends, and reading the news by narrowcasting rather than broadcasting means that we're surrounded almost entirely by people like us, whose views, whose opinions, whose prejudices even are just like ours. And Cass Sunstein of Harvard has shown that if we surround ourselves with people with the same views as us, we get more extreme. I think we need to renew those face-to-face encounters with the people not like us. I think we need to do that in order to realize that we can disagree strongly and yet still stay friends. It's in those face-to-face encounters that we discover that the people not like us are just people like us. And actually, every time we hold out the hand of friendship to somebody not like us, whose class or creed or color are different from ours, we heal one of the fractures of our wounded world. That is the us of relationship. Have you noticed how magical thinking has taken over our politics? So we say, all you've got to do is elect this strong leader, and he or she will solve all our problems for us. Believe me, that is magical thinking. And then we get the extremes, the far right, the far left, the extreme religious and the extreme anti-religious, the far right dreaming of a golden age that never was, the far left dreaming of a utopia that never will be, and the religious and anti-religious equally convinced that all it takes is God or the absence of God to save us from ourselves. That too is magical thinking, because the only people who will save us from ourselves is we, the people, all of us together. And when we do that, and when we move from the politics of me to the politics of all of us together, we rediscover those beautiful counterintuitive truths that a nation is strong when it cares for the weak, that it becomes rich when it cares for the poor, it becomes invulnerable when it cares about the vulnerable. That is what makes great nations. So here is my simple suggestion. It might just change your life, and it might just help to begin to change the world. Do a search and replace operation on the text of your mind. And wherever you encounter the word self, substitute the word other. So instead of self-help, other help. Instead of self-esteem, other esteem. And if you do that, you will begin to feel the power of what, for me, is one of the most moving sentences in all of religious literature. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. We can face any future without fear, so long as we know we will not face it alone. So, for the sake of the future you, together, let us strengthen the future us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening. And I would now like to put up both rabbis. We're very sad to lose these individuals. Okay.
Thank you very much, Sharon, for sharing those great video clips. I really appreciate it. I love Alex Trebek. I've been watching him for years. I also enjoy listening to Rabbi Sacks. What I found very interesting, I'd like to get your take on this, Rabbi Kahn, is that Rabbi Sacks gave a beautiful statement and wonderful sentiments, but it seemed very inconsistent with orthodoxy. He seemed to be veering off. He sounded like pretty much like a Reformed Jew. I mean, he's reading the 23rd Psalm, and he's saying that I fear no evil, for you are with me. That's normally translated. What the prayer is talking about is not other people, it's God being with him. But he just totally left God out of it and just said, as long as we don't walk alone, then we don't have to fear evil. And so you need to reach out to other people. And pretty much that's my message, and that's the message of Reform and Reconstructionists. But it sounded very unlike what an Orthodox rabbi would say. It seemed like he was kind of like running away from belief in God. Similarly, he also said that he really downplayed magical thinking. He said, if you think God's going to do something for you, that's just magical thinking. That's not going to do it. You got to do it for yourself. And so he sounded very much like a humanist, atheist, Reconstructionist. I didn't hear any God talk at all. And I'm kind of wondering, do you think he did that because he was talking to a larger audience? Or is this actually the way he feels? Or how did you interpret all that? Did you see it the way I did, or do you interpret it differently?
I would love to just veer off for a moment and make a different point, and then circle back to your very interesting question. I, in my own mind, had never, ever linked Alex Trebek with Rabbi Jonathan Sacks action that I ever would have made. But the fact that they both passed away at this time, and the fact that Sharon was able to get a clip from both of them, to me is more than just coincidence, because what you saw in front of you were two people who actually, and each in his own way, is a role model for a lost art. And that's the lost art of being soft-spoken, of being urbane, of being intellectual, of being knowledgeable, and of sharing one's ideas in a gracious, calm, humble way, as opposed to the modern, what we see today is I have to hit you over the head with a sledgehammer of my ideas. And so Alex Trebek and Rabbi Jonathan Sacks being talked about and being remembered together, I actually think is very appropriate. So, that never would have occurred to me. So thank you, again, Sharon, thank you for finding both of those fantastic clips. In terms of what you said, Rabbi Silver, I find it really, really interesting, because Rabbi Sacks was, in fact, and I think this is one of the secrets to his success, he was a universalist thinker. That means that even though he came and was firmly rooted in the Orthodox tradition, in his own approach to the world, he had studied philosophy actually before he decided to become a rabbi. He was an extremely open-minded, well-read, humanistic type individual, and he wrote. He's a very prolific writer and very in-demand speaker. He wrote over 25 books, and some of those books actually were attacked and criticized because they seemed to leave so much space for a universalist approach and for people all over the world to kind of hold on to and be inspired by. And people said to him, Rabbi Sacks, you're the Jewish leader. You're a chief rabbi of the United Kingdom. You need to be inspiring and talking to Jews. Why do you seem to have this approach about all of humanity? But that was part and parcel of who he was. And there's no doubt that Rabbi Sacks felt that kind of approach to life was deeply grounded in the Torah and in Judaism. And he had to fight sometimes to get those beliefs across. There's a wonderful quote that I actually saw today, where he was asked in an interview, he said, your most recent book has been vilified and castigated and attacked from extremists in different groups. And so he said, and they said, the interviewer said, does that concern you? He said, well, let me tell you how I look at it. When you are attacked by extremists, that's their way of giving you an honorary degree. And so he viewed it as a compliment that he was being attacked by people whose people whose opinions he viewed as extreme and extremist. So I think that he wanted to speak to all humanity. He wanted to touch, inspire, and lead and guide all human beings who wanted to understand. And that's really why I believe he played a unique role as the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, and became so popular, not just in the UK, but in Europe and certainly around the world, is because people said this is a person who can talk about God who can talk about spirituality, but at the same time can talk about literature and philosophy and all of modern knowledge, and has put all of that together in his worldview. And that speaks to people. That's I think what really one of the things that made him so unique.
I happen to agree with you. I think he was a great leader, and he spoke to people. But he really, the reason why he was so appealing to so many people, I think, is because he veered off of that approach about believing in God and a personal God, and he talked more like a humanist. And to that extent, I think he was very popular, and he really spoke to people. And I agree with you about the similarities between Rabbi Sacks and Alex Trebek. They were both very beautiful, pleasant, wonderful people they had a lot of integrity and a lot of calmness to them. And they both did what they thought was really important. Alex Trebek was really dedicated to knowledge, sharing knowledge and wisdom, and he wanted to encourage people to learn. He loved learning new things. And Rabbi Sacks also, like you say, was like that too. He was extremely learned and very well-versed. The two of them loved knowledge and education, and they were both had a very pleasant, warm, loving disposition. And so I agree with you. They had a lot in common. We're also observing now Kristallnacht. I wanted to find out if you had any thoughts that you'd like to share, Rabbi Kahn, about Kristallnacht.
You know, there's an endless, there's so much we can always learn from when we go back and we look at the history of the rise of the Nazi Party and the history of Nazism. And when it reached its culmination in the Holocaust, there's so much tragedy, but also so many lessons that we can learn from that. And I think that whenever we have a moment like the anniversary of Kristallnacht or the Yom HaShoah, of course, the Holocaust Memorial Day, it's incredibly important to do a couple of things. The first one, of course, is what we say when we say never forget. We'll never forget the victims of the Holocaust, who were not just Jews, but of course the 6 million, but also people of all different backgrounds who were persecuted and who were tortured and who were murdered by the Nazis and by the allies of the Nazis. And also these people suffered because the rest of the humanity in the world allowed it to happen. There were things that could have been done that were not done, and that's something we also should never forget. And that leads, I think, segues into a responsibility for us as Jewish people to be as caring and as concerned as we can about suffering humanity. People around the world, when we pick up a newspaper or we turn on the television and we hear about things happening around the world, it's very easy and it's very common, and I'm very guilty of it certainly, to say, well, what does that have to do with me? You know, I'm starting my day. I want to have my cup of coffee and breakfast and run off to do the things I want to do. What does it mean to me that in Africa, such and such is happening, or in Asia, such and such is happening, or in Europe, an attack in France, or an attack, as we just saw was it Norway? I think was the most recent type of attack, or Belgium. And we have to say, no, we have to be concerned about humanity around the world and the injustices in the world, and do everything we can to try, whether it's sending a check, whether it's other ways that we can support people. Sometimes just sending a message of support is incredibly important. So, and then the last thing I would just say is this: we can never be blind to threats in society that could lead to terrible acts of anti-Semitism, the way that Kristallnacht did. When Kristallnacht happened, that was a wake up for many, many people, but there were other people who said, and unfortunately they were in the majority, other Jews who said, this too shall pass. This is terrible, this is horrible. People were killed, synagogues were destroyed, Torah scrolls were burnt, Jewish shops windows were shattered. However, this will pass and everything will be okay. And they did not do everything they could to find ways to defend themselves and to, if necessary, escape from Nazi Germany. And we have to learn that lesson as well.
Rabbi, maybe you could mention a little bit about the Torah passage, and then afterwards I'll share some thoughts about Kristallnacht and the Torah as well. Would you like to share a little bit about the Torah reading?
Yeah, Sharon has her hand up, so we should take her comment, I think.
Sharon, you're muted.
If anybody wants to ask the rabbis questions or make a comment, please type it into the chat window. The chat is on the bottom center of your screen if you're on a PC. If you're on a Mac or an iPad, it's on the top, and you can just type it in, and then either the rabbis can read it directly or I can read it to them if they're still talking. That way we can have questions if you want to. Go ahead, Rabbi.
Yeah, or when we finish, we're going to go for maybe a half hour or so. And then when we finish, if you want, you can ask the questions live. You don't have to read it. We can have you share your questions with us live if you'd like. Rabbi, go right ahead. Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you. Just in terms of the parsha, I again see a wonderful connection between the loss of the two gentlemen who we were talking about and watching the clips of, and the Torah portion, and the many obituaries and eulogies for Rabbi Sacks. People compared him to Abraham, to the biblical Abraham, and what they said was that just as Abraham spread this idea, which was a novel and radical idea in his time, of monotheism, of belief in one God, and also of kindness to all people, which Avraham in Hebrew modeled, so too Rabbi Sacks went around the world. They said that his speaking tour, it was never at home. He was always around the world speaking to college groups, to students, to synagogues, to non-Jewish groups, and he was spreading teachings of Judaism that he felt could, as we said before, inspire everyone. So I think that in our Torah portion, we again see the focus on kindness. And I'll just mention one amazing example from the Torah portion of Chayei Sarah. Abraham tells his most trusted servant Eliezer to find a wife. Abraham at this point is an older man. He can't make the journey or the trip, but he says, I need you to go back to my home country, my homeland of Aram, and find a wife for my son Isaac, in Hebrew Yitzchak. And so the servant goes all the way back, makes this long, arduous journey to go back to Abraham's birthplace. And when he gets there, he has this challenge of, how in the world am I going to find? There's hundreds and thousands of people everywhere in cities and towns. How am I going to find the right girl? And so he says to God, he prays to God, and he says, God, I need help here. And let me come up and suggest a stratagem. The first young girl, the first maiden who comes over and offers to give water to myself and the travelers who are with me, and then says, think of this, and then says, I will also give water to the camels, that's going to be the right girl, and that's the one I know you've picked out to be for a wife for Yitzchak. Now, we have to pause for a moment and realize camels go a tremendous time in the desert, and they can go without drinking. But when they finally get to water, they drink a tremendous amount for a long period of time. So this was a crazy sign in a way. This was absurd. Where in the world are you going to find a girl who, number one, is going to come to complete strangers and say to them, please allow me to draw water for all of you, even though I don't know you, have never seen you before, have no reason to help you. That's hard enough. And a girl who's completely insane enough to say, I'm going to bring water and keep doing it all day long and maybe deep into the night until your camels have had enough to drink. And Rebecca, of course, shows up and does exactly that. And Eliezer says, thank you, Hashem, thank you, God, for showing me this is the girl. And she ultimately, of course, marries Isaac. And that's what happens. But I think the lesson is that as Jews, we not only have to be committed to kindness, we have to be committed to an insane level, an over-the-top level of kindness. There's no such thing as a stranger. Whoever needs help in the world, we have to be kind to them. And whatever help they need, no matter what a degree it takes to help them, we have to be willing to do that. I don't think that's easy by any means, but I think that's the goal, and that's a unique message from this week's Parsha.
Rabbi Kahn, I happen to agree with you completely, and I'll be speaking about that on Shabbat also, that of all the tests that were given for who would be the proper wife for the second patriarch, it wasn't based on study or rituals or anything other than really kindness to animals is what did it. And Gandhi said that you can judge a society by how it treats its animals. And so they judged who was a proper wife by how she treated animals. And so it is a very interesting thing. And in Israel, there's actually a higher percentage of vegans in Israel than any other country in the world. There's the vegan movement, kindness towards animals and not using animals for food, is growing faster in Israel than anywhere else. And I believe it has a lot to do with this belief in Judaism of kindness to animals, which is so significant that even the Shabbat ordains a day of rest for animals as well. So that is an important lesson that we both shared about this. We also see that this passage is the first one named after a woman, Chaye Sarah, the life of Sarah. And this week, we just had for the first time a woman who's going to be designated as the first woman vice president. So we have Kamala, and then the Torah reading is about Gamala, which is a female camel, is Gamala. And we have some interesting coincidences here with the Torah reading. And we also have, for the first time, we have POTUS and lotus, because Kamala means lotus. So we have POTUS and lotus, and I hope you'll take notice. And the other thing is that she's the first one to have a Sanskrit name in the White House, and also the first Jewish second husband, or second gentleman, I should say, or even second. There's never been a Jewish second lady, or he's the first Jewish second husband. And what's also, or gentleman, what's also very interesting is that Biden has quite a few Jewish granddaughters. It's like all of his daughters, all of them seem to have married Jewish guys. One married a doctor, one married another Jewish guy. He's got like a lot of Jewish grandkids. I think like all of his daughters, most of them married Jewish guys. And so it's really quite extraordinary the amount of Judaism that will be in the White House. And one other thing I just wanted to comment on, and maybe you can reflect on this, Rabbi Kahn. It is so essential, if you go back to the essence of Judaism, about kindness to animals and also kindness to others and caring about the stranger. And we see that with Abraham, who cared about the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. But I was kind of curious, maybe you can comment on this. The right-wing Jews in the United States seem to have flocked to a president who shows an abysmal absence of that kind of kindness that you talk about. Someone who wants to get rid of healthcare for the poor, someone who mistreats immigrants, someone who says America first and doesn't think of others, someone whose two children celebrate the fact that they have a picture of themselves with dead animals that they killed to show how macho they are from Africa, with absolutely no remorse or no kindness. It seems like someone who seems to have lacked that considerably in his treatment of others was the darling of right-wing Jews, despite the fact that Jews are supposed to care about the stranger and the poor and the immigrant and the animals. Do you have any thoughts about how that happened or why it happened? Or do you agree with me that it did happen?
We talked about, I think it was it the previous session, right, that happened right after the election? I think that was the timing. So at that time, we talked a little bit about the fact that the Jewish community, this was a very divisive and difficult election for the Jewish community, because there were people who were attracted to the different candidates and felt very concerned, to say the least, sometimes really fearful of the other candidate getting in. Those Jews who supported Trump, Donald Trump, were really, in many cases, not in all cases, of course, but in many cases, extremely fearful and opposed to the Biden-Harris ticket and the Democratic Party, taking over the presidency, and vice versa, of course, as well. Those Jews who supported Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and the Democratic ticket were, in many cases, extremely opposed to Donald Trump staying in office for another term. And I think, during that conversation, we started to unravel that a little bit by realizing that people are focused on different things. Some people feel the character of the president is essential. Other people feel, character isn't as important as policy and policy decisions. Some people feel that it's absolutely clear that that Trump has shown a tremendous connection and love for Israel. Other people felt like Biden and Harris will not be a threat to Israel. They'll be good to Israel. And so, different people have different views on this and different ways of looking at it. I myself I think it's very hard, and I think it's not probably not a good idea ultimately to take people's political viewpoints and to say this, must mean they're ignoring Jewish values, because I think that there are, Judaism is very diverse. There are all kinds of things that people can point to say, this is why, this connects to my Judaism, my Jewish feeling, and that's why I support this candidate. Well, meanwhile, on the other side, you have people saying, I'm a proud Jew, I'm a good Jew, and I support this other candidate. So it's very hard in my mind. And again, I don't know how productive it is, especially according to those people who think the election is over. Not everybody agrees to that. It's hard to really point to it and say, if you're Jewish, you can only view it in one way. It's monolithic. This is the only candidate for you if you're Jewish. I don't personally believe that myself.
I agree with you. I don't think it's helpful to say, if you're Jewish, you have to vote for a certain candidate. But I do think it's extremely helpful to say, if you're Jewish, you should vote for a candidate who's going to treat immigrants well and treat the poor well and be kind to animals and treat the environment well. I think if we don't do that, what's the point of being Jewish? We can't speak out about that. But I do agree with you. I don't think it's helpful, and I don't think it allows us to have productive conversations if we say, well, if you're Jewish, you have to vote this way. And both sides have done it, and I think it's very unhealthy. One more thing I wanted to ask you before we open it up to everybody else. In the Torah reading, when Rebecca first sees Isaac, it uses the word tipol for how she gets off the camel. And tipol, to me, means, it's related to the word to fall in English. It means she like literally fell off her camel. Like if you wanted to say she got down, you would say yored. You'd use the word yored, which it says tipol, and it's kind of like she really fell for him, like literally, or she fell in love. It's like she saw Isaac from afar and like, boom, the tipol, she just fell off of her camel. And I was just wondering what your take on it was, because it's just the way they describe it. It seems rather startling. Did you read it that way also, or am I reading too much into this?
No, not at all. And as usual, as is your custom, Rabbi, you put your finger right on, I think sometimes the most interesting points in the text. About 1,000 years ago, there was a rabbi named the Maharam of Rottenburg. He lived in Rottenburg in Germany. And he noticed that as well. He had about a 1 millennium edge on us. He got to it 1,000 years ago. And he said, why does the Torah say she fell off the camel? Why doesn't it descended? She got down from the camel. So 1,000 years ago, they didn't really think as much as we do in modern times about love and romance. So he gave a different explanation. And the explanation he gave was that at that moment, the Torah says Isaac had gone out into the fields to pray. It actually uses the word to meditate or to talk. Right. And the rabbis interpret that to mean he was praying. And what happened, according to this commentator, was that she had never seen a person like a spiritual presence or a spiritual eminence of Isaac in the field in this beautiful sunset scene, praying with all of his heart and with all of his soul. And so she fell off the camel because she was just almost in a sense of in a shock, or, oh my goodness, this is my husband, this spiritual man. How am I, from my background and my, the way I was raised, and she was raised in a house of idol worship, how am I going to be a match for this man? But the Torah tells us that Isaac immediately loved her, and she became a soulmate, and they had a beautiful marriage and a beautiful life. Although there was a little bit of controversy later on about the 2 sons that they had and what to do, how to handle that problem. But that's for next week's parsha.
Right. Then it also has a part where she puts the veil over her face so that she shows her modesty.
Yes.
And that same veil was used with Jacob and Rachel and Leah. And so now there's a custom that you lift up the veil when you get married to make sure you're marrying the right sibling, not getting stuck with the wrong one and have to work another 7 years. So that's the custom, the bedekin, where you lift up the veil. You don't want to make that. That would be a bad mistake. So I think we're ready to open it up for other folks. If anybody want to make any comments or ask some questions about any of the things that we've discussed, go right ahead.
You can unmute yourselves and just raise your hand if you have a question. The video that I showed earlier, while I'm waiting for people to raise their hand, the one of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, Olav Shalom, is a TED Talk that occurred in British Columbia, I think it was Vancouver in 2017, a couple of years ago. And the full video is available on YouTube. It's almost 13 minutes. So if you do want to see it, I can send you the link, or you can just go and look for Rabbi Jonathan Sacks TED Talk and find it. Does anybody else have a question? I know that Valerie made a great comment before, great observation about the two gentlemen, Alex Trebek and Rabbi Sacks. All right, so rabbis, you're still on then.
Okay, let me just share a little bit about Kristallnacht, because it's such a tragic episode. It's really the precursor to the Holocaust, and it's almost as if Hitler was just testing out his plans for the Jews to see what would happen. Like, what would happen if I did something really hideous and started just killing people and looting and pillaging and destroying the community? What kind of reaction would I get? And so he did this, what you call a pogrom, but it was barbaric. And what he noticed was he got no reaction at all. And that was pretty much the green light for him to think, I guess I can do whatever I want with the Jews, because nobody really gives a darn what happens to them, and nobody really cares. And if there had been a reaction, if the world had reacted differently, then perhaps history would have been very, very different. He certainly would have been encouraged to try to work out his issues in a different way. Maybe he would have planned to have the Jews leave, or maybe he would have enacted different policies. But when he went around actually killing people and destroying temples and smashing stores, and then after all the looting was done, he then said, okay, now the Jewish community has to pay for all the damage that was caused. They have to pay for it. He was doing things that were, it was like, he was just seeing how barbaric he could be to see what would happen. And it's really tragic that nothing at all, there was no response at all. And I thought I would share with you a quote from Rabbi Joachim Prinz, who fled Nazi Germany. And he said this: when I was the rabbi of the Jewish community in Berlin under the Hitler regime, I learned many things. The most important thing that I learned under those tragic circumstances was that bigotry and hatred are not the most urgent problems. The most urgent, the most disgraceful, the most shameful, and the most tragic problem is silence. A great people which had created a great civilization had become a nation of onlookers. They remained silent in the face of hate, in the face of brutality, and in the face of mass murder. America must not become a nation of onlookers. America must not remain silent. Not merely for Black America, but all of America. It must speak up and act from the president on down to the humblest of us, and not for the sake of the Negro, but for the sake of the Black community, but for the sake of the image, the idea, and the aspiration of America itself. The time has come to work together, for it is not enough to hope together. It is not enough to pray together, to work together, that this children's oath, pronounced every morning from Maine to California, from north to south, may become a glorious, unshakable reality in a morality renewed and united America. And I think he really speaks to our times, because we've seen recently some really bad things happening, and there's a lot of people who are silent, but more people than ever came out to vote this time around. And we saw more people than ever speaking out about issues and speaking out about the Black community. And I think that his words say so much to us today. And so I think what we learned from Kristallnacht is not only horrors that have happened to the Jewish community, but the sin of silence. And Lincoln said, to sin by silence when they should protest makes cowards of men. And there are many, many, many similar expressions by many famous people about the sin of silence. And so it looks like today, perhaps we've learned a lesson, and maybe people are going to start to speak up. Go ahead, Sharon.
One of the things I wanted to share was the words of Rabbi Prinz, I got to see his story a few weeks ago at a online. His words were timeless, and just like Rabbi Sacks, the small pieces that I put together for the video before, his words were timeless. It just struck me when I listened to his entire video, the 12, almost 13-minute video of the TED Talk that Rabbi Sacks did 3 years ago. It felt like it was yesterday, that it was for now. It was exactly where we are today. And, you know, these people, they just have a vision. And when they speak, the words that they speak are just so incredible. And I watched some of the memorials for Alex Trebek and some of the words he put in his book, and that they quoted him on some of the memorials on TV. Were just, again, timeless. You know, he wanted to leave this earth in his backyard with his family around him, with no clouds in the sky, with the sun streaming down. And that was the day that he passed. That was how he passed. I mean, he had a vision of what was going to be, and it came to be. So,
well, Rabbi Sacks stressed the importance of speaking to other people that you don't agree with and speaking them in a civil manner. And he stressed the importance of going out and talking to other people. And that's what we're doing right here today.
absolutely.
That's why I think what we're doing now is really a tribute to the memory of Rabbi Sacks, who totally advocated that people across the various lines and denominations speak to one another. And certainly within the Jewish community, we should be doing that. And we don't do that often enough. There's very, very little dialogue going on. So I think what we're doing here is very important. And I think we need to spread the word and have other people share in what we're doing. I do apologize to Rabbi Kahn if I say some things that are sometimes at odds with his beliefs, but I believe that this is the best way that we can really have instructive and important dialogue. If we just come on and just say things that we both think are true and don't parse the differences, then we don't really get too far, and we're kind of like dealing in superficial realities. So I think it's great that we can exchange views, agree on some, disagree on others, but remain civil. And I think really that's what Rabbi Sacks was all about. And I think also Alex Trebek was all about, just sharing knowledge and increasing the amount of learning in the world. So with that, I'll open it up again to anybody else, or to Rabbi Kahn, if you'd like to share some words.
I'm anxious to hear from any of the participants, any questions, comments that they may have.
Anybody, just raise your hand and, okay, Valerie, go ahead.
Unmute, there you go.
Hello, yes. Well, I was actually, and I had mentioned this at some point in the past, I was actually brought up in an Orthodox synagogue, and I had rejected and left really being part of any kind of congregation for quite some time, because no matter what I did, every time I seemed to have gone into services or temple, I was always bad. I was always a sinner. I always had to make up for my sins. I was a bad person, and let God forgive me, and God will punish you, and da 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 da. And after a while, I said, you know, God is supposed to be a parent, a loving parent. And if a parent ever treated a child like that, that would be abuse. And I'm tired of being abused, because while I'm not perfect, I'm not that bad. I'm not everything I do is not a sin. Shouldn't have to genuflect and be fearful of a God. I don't want to be fearful of a God if you believe in a God. I personally believe in spirituality, and I believe that we are all godly and there's God within us. I don't believe in an omnipresent, omnipotent person. I don't. But there is definitely something driving us, whether it's the universe, whether it's nature. So I rejected that. And I find when I do talk to and hear rabbis such as Rabbi Sacks and such as you, Rabbi Kahn, who have had experiences and educated themselves in areas that are not religious, that are secular, that are philosophy, that are educational, that are mathematics. and then make the decision to become a rabbi, I find that that brings out in a different sensibility to your approach to religion, and it's more modern, and it's more realistic, and it's more palatable, and it's more welcoming.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well,
Those
Barry,
are
I think you expressed the thoughts of many people. I've heard many people who have a similar experience as you when they were children, and they were pretty much turned off from religion. You should be grateful that you weren't raised in a fundamentalist Christian home, because then it wouldn't just be that God had a kind of a bad streak to him. It would be like he's going to toss you into hell if you don't agree with his view about Jesus, and you're going to be there for a very long time. So Judaism actually teaches that we're born with a pure soul, and that we're born in the image of God, B'Tselem Adonai, and that we are really good. But somewhere along the line, I think to control people, to make them feel bad so they have to keep coming back and trying to get forgiven, somewhere along the line, some aspects of Judaism, some denominations kind of moved away from that and got into a place where, yes, we don't measure up and we're not doing the right thing. And also, to me, having 613 commandments, it's kind of onerous, you know. It's kind of like, it's hard to have a good time and to enjoy yourself when you got all these commandments to worry about. And then you have to worry, well, which ones are still applicable and which ones aren't, and how do we know? And it just takes so long. I like to make it kind of simple. If you wake up in the morning and you express gratitude for the world and you feel a sense of love and joy towards other people, then that's really what Judaism is all about. And the word Jewish, Yehudah, means to give thanks. So if you just have a grateful spirit, that's really what it's all about. The rest is kind of like commentary. Now, it's true, Judaism has certain philosophies and beliefs that are unique. We actually believe that this world can be perfected, that if we work hard, we can make the world better and achieve ideals. Some religions don't think that. Like, some religions think we're born evil, so it doesn't matter what we do. The world is just going to be evil because we're born that way. Other religions teach that the only way to be successful in the world is you have to accept your fate. And then if you accept your fate, then when you die, then you'll come back again in a better way. And you really shouldn't try to change too much, just accept things as they are. So Judaism has some wonderful ideals that the world needs. But I think somewhere along the line, we moved away from, I think, the vision of Abraham, who had just an open tent and an open heart, and we overlaid it with too many rituals and too many burdens and a lot of negativity. And I like what you're talking about, a very positive, open, joyous approach. That's really what Judaism should be about. Yeah. Rabbi Kahn, did you want to respond to what Valerie was saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Valerie, thank you for your, sharing your thoughts and your feelings. I always feel very, very badly when I hear about any person who grows up in a way where their experience with Judaism is a negative one, because the way that it should be is that children should love and revel in their Judaism. There's so much for children to appreciate and to enjoy, and there's so many things to compliment the children about and to praise them about and to make them feel good and positive. So there's no doubt that there were many settings in which that was not done, and which children were made, to feel either badly for whatever reason, or negatively, or weren't appreciated, and it hurts me to hear about that. But I'm glad that you've been able to come to a place where you kind of put that behind you and rejoined a temple and are part of the a vibrant part of a vibrant Jewish community and a temple, which I think is fantastic. And I certainly wholeheartedly agree with what you said about Rabbi Sacks, that he was sending out positive messages in every conceivable way, and nobody would come away from an interaction with him, reading one of his books, listening to one of his speeches, or meeting him personally, with anything but the most positive feelings about Judaism. And so I couldn't agree more with what you had to say.
He really was an icon. I really enjoyed reading him. He had some things to say about Judaism and science, which I very strongly disagreed with, in which he attempted to reconcile the Torah with science. But his approach to life and his approach to Judaism and his positive energy and his embodiment of Jewish ideals and values was remarkable. And he had a really gift for conveying that. I wanted to ask you, Rabbi Kahn, similar to what Valerie was saying, do you think it's a problem that we raise children and say, okay, this is what you need to believe? For instance, if you're born in Saudi Arabia, then the kids are taught, okay, you need to believe that the Quran was written by God. And if you were born in Rome, then you're going to be taught, okay, you have to believe that Christian scripture was written by God. Now, these concepts might be false, but the kids are taught that. I happen to believe that's child abuse. I happen to believe that when you destroy a child's mind and you foreclose the opportunity to understand the truth, and you give them a dogma, which then shuts them off to the truth, and you teach them things that are false, it's child abuse, mental child abuse. And I wanted to find out if you think that's true, if you think that in Judaism, is it proper to teach the children, okay, God wrote the Torah, and to be a good Jew, you need to believe that. Is that inflicting children with a dogma that maybe if they were left to their own devices when they were older, they might believe something totally different? Do you think it's proper for us to teach children that you need to believe this? And kind of like what Valerie was saying, and to also teach children, if you don't believe it, you're going to be punished. Or if you don't believe it, you're not a good Jew. Or if you don't believe it, you don't really belong. What are your thoughts about that type of instruction?
I think it's the responsibility of every generation, of all adults, to transmit the values, the belief system, and the values and the principles of their, whether it's a religion, and we can talk about, not religion in a moment, but their values and their belief system to their children. To leave children without that, to raise children without instilling in them the values and the belief system that the parents have and that was transmitted to the parents, I think can have horrific consequences. And I think that we just have to look around today in the modern world, and it's clear to me, it might not be clear to others, but to me it's clear that we have gone way too far in the direction of saying, let's let children decide everything for themselves. Let's not give these things to children, and let's just let them decide.
Let me ask you something, Rabbi Kahn. If you had a choice, a kid is going to be sent to a madrasa and taught that to be a good Muslim, you have to kill the non-believer, and you should fly a plane into a building and kill people in Israel. Do you think a kid would be better off learning those values from their parents, or no values at all and nothing at all, and let the kid decide? You see, what you're saying is true to an extent, but if they're being taught things that are harmful, I believe it's brainwashing, it's dangerous, and that's why, like, we've spent trillions of dollars and lost thousands of lives in Iraq, in Afghanistan, fighting wars that Israel has fought. Why? All that money, all those lives. Have we ever stopped to think what's causing all this? Why are the people of Afghanistan killing us and trying to kill other people? Why are they flying planes? It's only because of a belief. And it's a belief that was inflicted on children when they were impressionable and couldn't think for themselves. So I don't think it's a good idea for parents to be teaching children nonsense and hate and to disregard their rational mind. I'd rather them learn nothing than learn these things. So, and when it comes to Judaism, I'd rather have a child learn Jewish ideals, and I'd rather every child be taught how to think, not what to think. When you teach a child what to think, that's indoctrination, it's brainwashing, and it's a negation of the freedom of thought that we should teach our children.
I think
what do you think about that?
I think what really the crux of the matter is the content of the material that we teach the children. The point that I was making before was to say that society, I think Western society, certainly in the United States, has moved very far, just from the 1950s, let's say, as an example, until today, which in a historical perspective is a very short, brief period of time, has moved away from the whole concept of values education, of teaching values to children. now we tend to say, well, of course, we're going to teach you how to do math problems, and we're going to teach you how to write English, and we're going to teach you how to read how to read and write the 3 R's, and we're going to teach you about science. And that's great. And that's fantastic, because that's neutral. That's viewed as neutral content. But we're not going to teach you any values. We're not going to teach you, certainly we're not going to mention religion in the schools, because that would, violate the Constitution and the separation of church and state. But we're not even going to teach values. And I think that a lot of children grow up warped because they haven't been taught basic values that had been, until modern times, passed on to the children. But really, again, the key question becomes for every person to ask, how do they feel about the things that are being taught to the children? If a person looks at Judaism and says, I think these are dangerous ideas, I think these are negative ideas, I think these are potentially, harmful ideas, then of course, one would want to protect the children. It would only make sense and logical to protect children from those ideas. If one looks at Judaism and says, here is a religion full of beautiful values, life-affirming principles, positive outlooks on life, then it's a benefit to teach those things to the children. My entire career has been devoted to Jewish education, and I have always tried to do the best I could to bring positive, life-affirming messages to the children within the context of the Torah and Jewish teachings and values. So I feel really good about that. Is it possible that there's someone who could look at me and my whole career and say, you are abusing children by teaching them these things? Sure. But kind of like, I can't really do much about that, because the results of the work that Jewish educators do, I believe, is tremendously, tremendously valuable and precious, because we're raising children who are proud of their Judaism, proud of the Jewish values and principles that they've been taught.
I just want to remind you.
The content.
I just want to remind you that when the schools were busy teaching what you call religious values, they were teaching that religion was teaching them that the Native Americans should be slaughtered because they're not Christians. And just like the Jews exterminated native peoples in Canaan, that we should exterminate the Native Americans. They were also taught by their parents, without being able to think about it, that because the African Americans are descended from Ham, who according to the Torah was supposed to be a slave to his brothers, that they were taught these values, that therefore the blacks were meant to be slaves. And the Jewish people, they were taught that the Jewish people killed Jesus, and therefore if they were being wiped out in the Holocaust, too bad, they had it coming. That's what kids were taught by their parents because of religion. And I think religion has done a horrible job, an abysmal job in atoning and recognizing their faults and having just even a modicum of self-reflection and just looking in the mirror and saying, wait a minute, there's been some bad things that have happened in religion, including the denial of evolution and Darwin. I mean, and Galileo was subjected to the threat of torture. I think religion needs to take a really hard look. And I again say, I'd much rather teach a child how to think than what to think. Even if you teach a child to believe in God and say, well, yeah, God's true, but you don't teach them why to believe that or to have an open mind about it, I think it's dangerous. Go ahead, Emily, what do you think?
Okay, I also, like Valerie, was raised in Orthodox synagogue. My children, however, were raised in a Reform synagogue. And some of them are still very active in Judaism. My daughter in Atlanta in Reconstructionism, but we found out something last year, Rabbi. My son, 50 years later, told a story to you, and I don't know if you remember. He kind of rejected Judaism when his grandfather, who was living with us, passed away, and the rabbi at the time came to the house, a Reform rabbi, and said, don't feel bad, he's with God and God has taken him. And my son at that time rejected the idea of God. And it wasn't until he met you at Mimi's house one time for, I think it was a high holiday service, and you gave him the idea that God really dwells within us all. And the God within us is the good force. It brought him back to Judaism. So we really don't know what kids are going to interpret what we say. An offhand remark by this wonderful rabbi at the time that God had taken his grandfather, turned him off. And it wasn't until 50 years later, he's 50 years old, when he met Rabbi Barry, who said to him, no, God is within you and is a good. Do you remember that?
I remember it very well. Yeah, I've had similar experiences with many people, because I don't teach, or I don't express the concept that God is taking care of everything, and after you die, you're going to go to this heavenly abode. And
Right.
I've had people who have told me, thank you so much for not lying to me. I just heard people, rabbis, lying so often. It's not just Orthodox. Reform rabbis peddle what I consider the same fantasy. And they don't like being lied to, and they don't like being told, oh, it's all for the good, everything's fine.
Right.
No, it's not fine. but there's a good thing that you can look at it in a positive way, but you don't have to deny reality to do it. If you look at and Jewish ideals allow us to view the world in an extremely positive way without having to believe things that don't make sense or that are not true. Yeah, I do remember that well, and it's very gratifying, along with all the hate mail that I get from people who tell me that what I'm saying is blasphemy and it's horrible and all this stuff. It is nice to hear people say that they were going to leave Judaism and now they have a place for it. And I also think it's, to some extent, it's good that there's a lot of different expressions of Judaism, because then people of different backgrounds can relate to maybe one type or another. But I still maintain that there is such a thing as truth and falsehood, and that we should always have our mind open so that we can try to weed out falsehood and not teach children to believe things that are not accurate, and definitely not teach them to believe on faith, because when you have blind faith, it's dangerous. Anybody else want to share some thoughts?
Well, may I, if I may, I too like Emily, when we had Clifford, our son, and we're going back some time now, we had to make a decision what we were going to do, because when you have a child, there's a lot of factors that you have to take into consideration. And when I found, and Rabbi, you'll relate to this, we found Temple Sinai, Rabbi,
Yeah.
in Delray Beach, temple of your dad.
Yeah, he founded it, right?
Yeah, so when we found that temple, I found, because I had a strong religious background, I didn't want him to be indoctrinated. And Mishka and I, we were always talking about that. So when he would be taught in Hebrew school, because he was bar mitzvahed, stories about the Bible, stories about Cain and Abel, stories about Moses, we would talk to him and say, well, this is a story. What do you think about that story? What do you think that story means? And you engage the child, and that's how you get a child to think. And in the meantime, you're giving them a history of your own people, where you came from, where you belong, how you fit into the picture. But you have to teach the child to think about these stories, about these parables, about these religious experiences. And believe it or not, my dad came around, may he rest in peace, and he became quite liberal in his thought patterns too, and became very, very open to different concepts and different ways of doing things. And I think what religion does for a child, if handled properly, it gives them a very strong moral compass. Right. As a man now, he can make the decision as to whether he wants to be religious, whether he wants to go to temple, what he does. But I can tell you right now, I feel very strongly that because he had a very strong moral upbringing, what was right, what do you think is wrong? Would you do this? The one thing you base your life on, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. If you don't want this done to you, then do you think you should do it to somebody else? And it really boils down to that. It's very, very basic as far as I'm concerned. And I'm happy to say our son grew up with a very strong moral compass, and he's a really good guy.
Well, that's great. And it's disconcerting to me to hear a Reformed synagogue teaching that Adam and Eve and these things are actually true. My father used to say that these stories never happened, but they're all true. They're true because they make a point. They can teach a moral lesson. But to teach in a Reformed synagogue that these things happen, that is a complete violation. And my father would be appalled if he knew that in a synagogue that he founded, they're actually teaching that. The other thing is that if you teach kids to believe stuff that isn't true or doesn't make sense or is not rational, and you base their entire moral compass around that, if they come to a point where they can't believe these things anymore, like let's say they believe in Adam and Eve, and then they study science and they say, oh my goodness, I don't think Adam and Eve really happened. Their whole value system could just collapse completely and they'll just deny Judaism and go somewhere else. But if you teach them a type of belief that's based on what's real and built on evidence, and that they can believe it themselves, not because somebody told them, but that they internally believe it, then they're going to be much stronger in their faith and in their beliefs, and you don't have to worry so much about them leaving. And what makes Judaism, I think, such a great religion is it really, really appreciates the intellect and the mind and learning. And Judaism's always been evolving and growing and learning. So to teach a child to think and to learn and to incorporate all of science into your religion, that's just totally consistent with what Judaism is all about. And that's why I think that we have a really good chance through Judaism to really improve the world, because it's based on things that are real. Anybody else want to share some thoughts with us?
Rabbi, can I just ask you a quick
Steve,
question?
go right ahead. Steve Geller.
Valerie, I think was the perfect example of, Rabbi, what you said. She wasn't presenting the stories in the Torah in a, you have to believe this and you have to do this or
Right.
else that. She said, this is Moses, this is Adam, this is Eve, this is the story. What do you think it means? And that's the way you get someone to speak. You know, there's a tradition that, why do we have Genesis, the whole book of Genesis to begin with? There are very few laws in the book of Genesis. So what's the whole point of, it's just a story. It's a storybook, as you would say. So the answer is that the sages say is that what we can learn, and Valerie, you said it so beautifully, what we can learn from the people being described in Genesis, which is really our beginning, are life lessons that can make us the right types of people. If we believe Abraham was the right type of person, emulate that behavior. If you believe Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and Moses, and that's how to teach kids. I never taught my children, do this or you'll be in trouble, do this or you'll burn. I don't believe in burning in hell. Scientifically, you can't burn in hell. If there is an afterlife with a soul, there is no heat, there is no temperature, and there's no time. So you literally can't burn. That's not how you can punish them. So I don't believe in that. I don't believe that's what should be presented to kids. I think some Jewish schools kind of do that, treating kids like sheep, trying to herd them from one place to the next. But Rabbi Kahn has given some good examples, and Valerie, I just love exactly what you said, is exactly how the religion is passed on in the most beautiful way. So
yeah, I totally agree with Valerie's approach, but I think she was commenting that at the synagogue they were teaching something different, and she kind of had to like straighten them out. And the same thing happened with me. When my kids were little, we wanted to send them to a preschool. So we went to a conservative preschool in Boca. And my wife is always, she's very often embarrassed by me because she never knows what I'm going to say. So we went to the preschool, and she's asking the typical things, is it safe? What's the quality of the education? What are the facilities like? And my question was, are my kids going to be taught that God wrote the Torah? And she looked at me like, don't say that. And they said, what do you mean? Are they going to be taught that God wrote the Torah? I said, is that what you teach them? And they said, well, yeah, of course. Well, I mean, who else wrote the Torah? Of course we're going to teach that. So I said, okay, I just wanted to know. And so then when I came home, I said to my wife, I said, I have confidence that I can influence our kids more than these people can. So I like everything else at the school so they can go. And then when the kids, when they came back home, I taught them to believe in science and to consider all these things stories. My son came home once, he was like, I don't know, maybe 3-4 years old. And he says, Dad, you're not going to believe what happened in school today. I said, why? What happened? He said, they taught us about Adam and Eve, and they told the kids that it was true, and the kids believed it. And then they think that Adam and Eve really lived. Like my kid, he was incredulous that anybody could believe this stuff. But that's in general what they're teaching. And also what I've noticed is Reform synagogues are teaching this also. It's kind of like they kind of forgot what it means to be Reformed, and they're teaching the same thing. But yeah, I taught my kids, when you go to school and you say the pledge, don't say under God, because every people wants to believe that they're under God and the other people aren't, and that gives them license to do all types of horrible things. So just say we're one nation with liberty and justice for all. I don't like people claiming that their nation is under God, because our nation has done a lot of ungodly things. And if God was behind all this stuff, then it's really, you could consider it blasphemy against God. So I think if you want to say one nation striving to be godly, that's okay. But I think we have to be very, very careful about what we teach children, because to me, the most important thing is to teach them how to think, not to tell them what they have to think. Well, I think we've had a good discussion.
Uh-oh.
Be glad to hear it. Otherwise, maybe we can wrap it up.
Let's wrap it up.
I was going to, on the wrap, I was going to show Ma Tovu, Rabbi.
Okay,
I
great.
think everybody will like that. This is from Hanover, Germany. You need to give me a couple seconds to get it ready. So just talk amongst yourselves for right now. Give me 1 second.
Rabbi Kahn, why don't you filibuster for a little bit? Share some wisdom with us.
Give me a couple seconds.
I'm not too good with that, but I have enjoyed the conversation immensely. Thank you, everybody.
We enjoyed you too.
Yeah. And I'm glad we could pay tribute to Rabbi Sacks and to Alex Trebek, and also mention about the lessons of Kristallnacht. We should never forget that. I'll be talking about that on Shabbat. And I think it's really important to keep that memory alive.
Absolutely. I think, and Valerie summed it up very well. She said that both Rabbi Jonathan Sacks and Alex Trebek were men of words, and they both believed in learning. Alex Trebek, he went to work every day, loved working, loved Jeopardy, and he just read and read and read. And if he had a question, he would read up so that if the contestants asked a question, he could answer it. And just amazing. And the full video of Rabbi Sacks, I'm sure there's more of them, the TED Talk, just amazing, amazing things. So
if I could just mention, the two of them were both mentioned.
They were both mensches or mentioned.
That's the plural. The plural's mentioned. The plural mentions they were mentioned.
Thank you all for coming. I'm going to show this video right now. It is of the beautiful synagogue, the great synagogue of Hanover, Germany. You'll see it in its prime, and then you'll see it in its demise. It was burned at Kristallnacht. So I think you'll really, if you'll bear with me for one moment, I will show this. Thank you all. That was an anthem to the Kristallnacht, which occurred many years ago today. And I just want to let everybody know we have a program on Saturday evening at 7 p.m., an Israeli documentary called The Return of the Violin. It is in all English at 7 p.m. It will be a free program on Zoom. And it will, the movie is about a violin that is now in the ownership of Joshua Bell. And I think you'll really like the video, the film. So thank you all for attending tonight. I wish you all Shavua Tov. Thank you again, rabbis. Appreciate you all being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you very much.